All right, we shall Pinax TV soon. You best say a Drew summary. I'll be jibre na one yat na the updates. What Ghana hani amano ni the echo na yede ebe bro. Now quickly no yenko Ghana has a bit me who say Ghana is currently pushing for reparations for Africa, people of Africa, and the people of African descent because omuchiremwa enema ye ditia abibremum hafo menka say slavery any transatlantic slave trade course no dwumadie bi anasa ade a yede ye Africans na ensem fata say yede omokra omuchiremwa one criminal act omo ede ye abibrem hafo enti currently no Select African Summit a course so Latin America and Caribbean Forum a course wo Bogota Ghana ye championing reparations Ghana for Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto ablakwa kopie mu honoma ono so with the summit no so den nsem atudwa ekire mu se eniema course so ye de Africans ye di edi omo slave trade mu na eniema ni bi wo ho eni enyan eni etan bibrimam ha se ya enti se se emraso se ye de menka se compensations any ade de ebre bibimanfo no omo they were affected no honom enti se se the Ghana is championing reparations for the whole of Africa and then people of African descent enti no any ensemo a se se ekoso hanom ti quickly no ebetie ensemo a Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto ablakwa editu dwachiremu a niema ye de bibimanfo no eni enyan eni etan honom a se they currently Ghana is leading the race for reparations for Africa. And ye be konia koti ensem a Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto ablakwa de tudwa ye ba ne abeto aso de amamo.
Ghana wishes to draw attention to the very consequential resolution which President John Dramani Mahama of Ghana will be tabling on the 25th of March, which is just next week, Wednesday, a few days from now. This is a resolution seeking to declare the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. For more than 300 years, Africans were treated as property, were tortured, humiliated, raped, and forced out of the continent, over 12.5 million of them, in the most dehumanizing and despicable circumstances. The world is yet to acknowledge this. Perpetrators are yet to apologize and have not compensated the victims. This is the time to demand reparatory justice, and this is the time to demand restitution.
All right, Foreign Affairs Minister na den nsem atu dwachiremu a ni ayayade a yede ye bibimanfo ni nyina o se omo hwe na omo eba no mebe pata Africans ye ka reparation na empata bi omo de beba na omo de aba be pata bibimanfo omo a yede sa ne ma no edi omo no mu kiremu a ya benefit bibia emfa mfiri mu bibia ni ho amfaso bia ni ho ayenya edi free sa transatlantic slave trade course no enti na hu be hia se enemre mu because the effects of that particular slavery and our slave trade course no Africans we are still having the effect on us enti na ehu be hia se omo beba no be patan am ehu se the omo de yen no omo anye ni ye because as we are speaking now people of the Western world me can say EU omo ankasa ekuo bi omo anyi sa ne ma ntum se ade a na wo se omo ade wo so mo ba no be pata Africans because omo kiremu a it is something that they came into agreement enti ehu hia so be ba no ma ba be pata men kan say Africans UK omo di mu bi omo kiremu a ehu hia se omo be ba no ma be pata Africans President John Dramani Mahama so gina ne na so said dabi enema esi enema ekoso wo UN General Assembly meeting bi okobia no or the two dwachire mu se enema ekoso nyaade a na menka ne se etwa yie enti na wo so omoba na omo ebe pata yen na asat men kan say same way ya ka say ye de to dwa say the European Union omo gina omo na so say chinchina enya de say omo ba be patan because omo hu ni say they went into negotiations and ema omo agi to mu say ampa omo ebe yes slave trade no but then Ghana yenso da so gina ye na mu kire mu say bibia ni ho e kire say de omo ye no na eye men kan say obi agi to mafane afa obi agree say slavery no enkoso ana say benefits bi ani ho e koye e de ma eye bibiman for ne omo aye de omo fa sa ya de they came, they took the strongest out from Africa and then some other countries no omo koye omo even eniema omo de omo no bi wo ho a sebi moampo ye mfa sa eniema no emfa nye omo foreign affairs minister Sajina de na so kire mu say yan benefit ana say ye nya mfa so bia and free transatlantic slave trade ne ho yenko ne tie foreign affairs minister Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa na yensamra sisi
claim that Africans were those who sold out their peers. I mean, it is all balderdash, with all due respect. Africa did not benefit from this whatsoever. Rather, we bore the brunt. The brightest, the strongest, the healthiest were taken out. After they were taken out, their indignity was further perpetrated by the fact that they were treated worse than even animals. Pets had more rights than our brothers and sisters who were forcibly removed from the continent. And research has demonstrated that we still live even with the consequences of that, because the kind of food, very poor, poor nutritional food that was served them, which was not good for their growth, and is affected their genetics and their children that were born after that, which has continued. A lot of the diseases which continue to plague the African continent has been traced to that.
The foreign affairs minister na ordinance some to dwachire mu a ayayade a yede ye eye abibimanfo mu kopie mu ekodi eye transatlantic slave trade no mu omo ekopie mu ewo hobi no anase ye before mu free oman mu anase abibiman mu edi free ha edi kopie mu ewo aman foforo so a omo koye adwuma no ayayade yede ye omo ebi wo ho aduane edi be ma omo mpo no na aduane no enye balanced diet aduane no eye very raw eno ene ma omo nyinya yare bebre ti wo hwe abibiman mu ha yare a echeche ebi ti se Ebola ne other menga ne se yare a echeche abibiman for no kire mu a ni nyina ensunsuanso ni bi ene de ekoto yen ewo menka ne slavery ni mu no ni nyina ensunsuanso ni bi ene yare a etoto abibiman no na owie ye no on the Caribbean ho no wie ye na Brazil president Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva enso so edina no tum bi say yes ade a Ghana omo ade esi omani so ombeye led by President John Dramani Mahama no ade a menka ne say ne kwan so ano no Brazil's president Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva has endorsed Ghana's push for reparations at the United Nations, backing a resolution to recognize the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. And yes, Brazil president is also to say yes. And ye demanded from UK, any other countries are omo championing a slave trade and as a slavery back in the days are omo ayayade etia me can say be mindful no Ghana ade aye championing no ehu hia say yes indeed it say e man bi to say Ghana yen say UK also omo ba na omo compensate yen omo so omo eboa sika no sika puduwa no na omo ede bre yen enema bebre no also omo ya e kire say yes indeed they are me can say omo compensate yen and I say omo edi niema brain said ebeya ebesha na mu men kan sa enti that is what the men kan say Brazil president on also edi atudwa na ye to mu was speaking at the CELAC African Summit in Bogota. He threw more light, yes. He threw support behind the initiative led by President John Dramani Mahama ahead of a planned UN General Assembly vote on March 25, 2026. It started here. somewhere 2025, the whole year 2025, afia ye see ho say Africa ha, we are seeking for reparation. We are seeking say omo ebeba na omo de mpata bi e de abre Africans. The whole 2025 ye see ho say reparation year. 2026 to 2036, a decade of reparation, 10 years. Ye de see ho 2026 ya start here President John Dramani Mahama LED in Bogota, SALAC Africa Summit no. Brazil president and so thrown his support to Ghana and President John Dramani Mahama. Ghana's Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa says the move is about historical accountability, not just financial compensation. And he also historically, Bonia, other countries, especially most of them in the European Union, or more EDD Africans. Emo course an kwasum no mu no enye se bibia bia sika keke bi no mo pe e de afi on, but then historically they have to come and make sure say on be compensate and say ewiase nyina be hu say de omo ye no omo anye ne ye e wo ho na Brazil president etu ne nsem odi to dwa ne mu nchine a ono angasa e de ne nsem etu dwa e wo SALAC African summit na since ye be ko na yakwa kotie president Lula da Silva ye be ka kotie ne nsem odi to dwa na yaba.
This is the objective of the ministerial meeting that Brazil will organize in April 9. Brazil, Latin American, and Caribbean work together to Africa in different multilateral initiatives. For more than 10 years, from 2025, in a declaration of the human rights, Brazil supports the resolution of the African Group of the General Assembly that declares that the African human trafficking is one of the worst human atrocity of the humanity. Without the cohesion acting of the South-South cooperation, we risk of crystallizing a scenario of paralysis that goes against the commercial agreements. My friends, the bridge between our regions is not made only of agreements and declarations. It's made also from people, from a diaspora that unite us. The territories are not only soil, but history alive. Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa are the same territory, essential, marked by resistance, fight, dignity.
And that was President of Brazil, President Lula da Silva, no didn't summer to Jachrimwa, or supported President John Dramani Mahama, say yes. Or the Nesama to just say UK, any other countries are or more a champion, slavery, a baby mamuno, or say omoba na omode empatabi in all forms. De ebre a year a baby mind for said a beya, a beshe anaimu, a honachri, we are saying, say, the omo year during the transatlantic slave trade, no, na a ye adia, a fakwemu, a honomo, ain't yes. The initiative here, President John Dramani Mahama air championing, but the country said 2025, almost I said 2026 to 2036, a decade of reparations, a decade, and I say, and fear dua, you know, the Genemo Akosi say, or more the empata be UK, the empata be Ghana, other countries, he said, Cote d'Ivoire, other countries, Nina, ya the empata be ebe bromona, and naka creye di anyway, a ho. Ena ebema omo ebekwa koto so aba na ye de no update no ebebrem na we an update from the Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa na ono so de nsem tujwa with the kind of engagement on a president of Brazil ekoye also president of Brazil, His Excellency Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva has today announced his country's full support for President John Mahama's UN resolution seeking to declare the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. Now, Brazil president or through the support and I said or President John Dramani Mahama any African Union say omo ebe siki eye empatabi ombe pray empatabi ediama eye African countries. Yedi omo efa eye menka ne slave trade ni mu no ade a omo eye diti a menka ne nipa eye the gravest crime obeye de tia uankasa wo nipa ewo hono. Was this is profoundly significant considering the fact that Brazil has the largest population of people of African descent outside the continent of Africa. No tremo we ebema the voices behind reparations and as empata ye seeking from UK and other countries hono ebema emuaye do because ohia Brazil omo koye slave trade ni ade eduru say ye omo de omo back to other countries no Brazil na dodo na akopie ye enti dodo na omo Brazil no most of them are people of African descent enti say omo dodo no if they back their president who is backing Ghana and the president John Dramani Mahama ebema ejuma no aye very significant dodo no omo voice will be heard. Our reparatory justice coalition is getting bigger and better. We are confident of victory at the UN on the 25th of March 2026. And he said, "25th March ye di enemy I think 2 days a di enemy. Honor President John Dramani Mahama beko akopiem na ya to swaba omo agina mu aye voting akire se ampa omo beja tum se transatlantic slave trade course so eye ade ankwaso mo de abebiman komu no eye the gravest crime ever to happen to humanity anti no so omo gi anu tum wi na yes reparations no atwa so e wo honum ti Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa kire mu a omo ewo gidie se ukwada ebeyi omo ebetimi edi nkunim. I am most grateful to President Lula for the opportunity to engage him in the margins of the ongoing CELAC Africa Summit in Colombia. Reparatory justice shall be achieved. And yes, osadi to just say neniaje and also the Brazil president has say otimi engage ye Ghana ye me Ghana say ye entourage ko PMO Colombia Bogota ma CELAC African Summit ne course so and in the supporter or the ababetai ye Ghana for echi enyina e wo honti. Yes on a president Brazil president and omo and your screen so you could see the foreign affairs minister and then the Brazil president omo a picture fe ewo honomo na eno emu ena update is also about from the presidency. President John Dramani Mahama the communications on communication about betu President Mahama to lead Ghana's delegation to the UN special session on reparatory justice. And this is here, President John Dramani Mahama and a lead Ghana's delegation of PM UN General Assembly na say na omo we a special session on reparatory justice. It's way a session Yafre just because Ghana and President John Dramani Mahama is seeking justice. Omo seeking impata from UK, any other countries, wo kwasuma omo de abibiman ekomu no ye kan ya say President John Dramani Mahama will leave Accra on Monday for New York and Pennsylvania for a historic visit centered on reparatory justice and the commemoration of victims of the transatlantic slave trade. Enti eno ena yede ama ono se obefree Monday obefree ha eye enedwa day na wakakopiem ewo New York and Pennsylvania ewo ne visitor omo ekosiki for a reparatory justice. Ena omo asanso aye a commemoration of victims of the transatlantic slave trade. It is now, and I say a drew mra. See any there. Say UN, they want to acknowledge the victims. And that you know omu muse bibi koswa omu hu koka mu no e was ye acknowledge you omu na be empata bi e was ye de momo say ye to aba na omu edi nkunimu hia na che say ye be make sure say justice will be served on reparation and then omu hu koka mu no so they will acknowledge them as victims of a slave trade. The president will convene and deliver the keynote address at a high-level special event on reparatory justice at the United Nations headquarters on Tuesday. The event, on the theme Reparatory Justice for the Trafficking of Enslaved Africans and the Racialized Cattle Enslavement of Africans, will bring together world leaders and high-level dignitaries to address this critical matter of historical injustice. And way a very special one, just because President John Dramani Mahama started championing reparation. On Wednesday, President Mahama will address the UN General Assembly during the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. And President John Dramani Mahama in the keynote address United Nations General Assembly International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. And it's a day in we are seeing say they kai who kodi mu nkwaso no na yasanso ade akai who kodi transatlantic slave trade no ye de yakayaka de no ye si wo say ye de celebrate but say you say UN and United Nations and so be atum na ye de patasika ama no ukuada na ni nyina ebesi ho. President Mahama will represent Ghana's position, which has been adopted by the African Union on a landmark resolution to declare the trafficking of enslaved Africans and the racialized cattle enslavement of Africans as a grievous crime against humanity. And yes, and because President John Dramani Mahama AU and also to say yes, this is a cause the whole of Africa should back. President John Dramani Mahama, he will stay on his position seeking for reparations for Africa. The visit will commence with a solemn wreath-laying ceremony at the African Burial Grounds Memorial in New York on Tuesday, paying tribute to the memory of enslaved Africans. President Mahama's itinerary includes a visit to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, where he will deliver a keynote speech and engage the Ghanaian community at Temple University. This is from Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, MP, spokesperson to the president, and he is also the Minister of Government Communications. Pennsylvania, there is a university, Temple University, and now speech ewo honom obesanso etu na asem ne botaye potinzi okopie mu ho no obetu emu enchine bio na omo asanso aye wreath laying ewo African Burial Grounds ewo New York na omo de akai omo free mu ewo slave trade ni mu no ehonso so omo ebele wreath ewo honom ansa na wakopiem ewo UN General Assembly na se na ordinance akwakotudwa ewo honom. So this is the update President John Dramani Mahama, African Union, European Union, and the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Ghana. Ghana is championing the reparations of the transatlantic slave trade and then slavery in Africa. That is the update. Mamo.